Hey, welcome to the podcast number 54. Today we're going to kind of go on about, what the news has been over the last 4 weeks, pretty much since we did the last podcast. And we're going to kind of break down this Ukraine Psyop that's been going on. But first, before we get into that and we start the podcast, just wanted to make a quick few announcements. Before we get to the really big one, there's a new, well, here, let me just grab it really quick. We got a new member here. This is kind of... we have a governor here in Florida who's just kicking ass and taking names. And if you have not been paying attention, this is actually going to be a podcast coming up we're going to be doing soon about Disney and how they have a special district. And hopefully my man, Ron DeSantis, there we go, will be removing that special district. Where are we here? In the next shot, you'll get a better you'll be able to see him a little bit better. And then also just the way things have been going with DeSantis, this week, the flag. If those primaries were held today, I might be voting that way. But again, that's a whole nother podcast. Okay, so let's get to the big announcement that we got going on here. We are going to be taking it on the road next month. So that's probably going to be, now the time frame doesn't really matter, but I'd say the latter half of the 50s. Parts of the episodes are probably going to be us on the road up in Chicago in what are we going to call it? Studio L, if you will. And he's been on the podcast before. I think it was in number 7. Ken Carangello is going to be joining us, or Mub, as I think he likes to be called. He's going to be doing a little producing. He's going to sit in as a guest for a podcast or two. I think we might have another guest or two, still kind of working the booking out there. And that's going to be fun. We got a nice little studio set up there. It's going to be a good time taking this on the road, and I can't wait to do that, let alone working with my best friend. And we got some jokes. If you think I got jokes, wait till you see what we got in the bag here. All right, so that's basically our announcements here. Let's just quickly do me begging for you to like and follow us on Facebook. Please subscribe to the podcast on YouTube. We are also on Rumble. I actually have 2 Rumble pages. Honestly, Rumble is very confusing. So I have the YouTube page linked to Rumble, and I started another Rumble account, but uploading 2 things is kind of redundant at the moment. So if I ever have issues with YouTube, I'll obviously switch over to Rumble and get that whole thing caught up. But not too worried about people being worried about that. Anyway, also check out our Facebook page, give it a like, and please share all of this stuff with your friends. Like, comment, do what you can. It really helps get the podcast out there. All right. This is your ever-evolving, never-ending first stop-shop current events and politics podcast. If society's a joke, then we're just here for the first set.
Ready! Set! Podcast!
Okay, let's get this show on the road. So if you have been living under a rock the last, month or so, you probably haven't noticed that, Russia has invaded Ukraine. And this has kind of been a thing that's been going on. And what's very interesting to see is how the media has been approaching it. So, we have all of these headlines that popped up when everything was starting. Ukraine defends, Russia invades, White House meets with all. I mean, it's just... This is honestly just a little of a sidetrack. It was very interesting to see how all of this kind of, broke, because it was just like coronavirus a few years ago, where everyone was on the same page. You had kind of this unity going on for a few weeks, but then you see the media start to splinter and going off into their own little ideologues, if you will. And one of the things we started seeing was... One of the narratives we started seeing actually was more of this, like, Russia is bad, NATO is good. And, it's just a very misguided talking point, because, is Russia really the bad guys here? Because as we're going to go through this podcast and look over everything, you're going to kind of see that I don't really think it's about Russia being bad or the USA being good. This is just a narrative that everyone likes to talk about. And another thing that you see too is, NATO is strong, Russia is weak, or this whole strong versus weak, good versus bad narrative. And I don't think that's what's going on here. I think what we really have is strong versus weak. And honestly, this was the second or third episode in the Karate Kid series. And there was this episode that they did where they were kind of giving John Kreese's background. And, I mean, not to get too bogged into the details, but at the end of the episode, he was getting ready to go off to war. And they were kind of, the whole thing was basically marred in talking about that you've been bred to think, there's a binary choice between good versus weak. And really, it's just, good and I keep conflating the two, good versus bad, and really good versus bad is the eye of the beholder. I mean, you can kind of look at that through the institution of Hollywood and how they institute the protagonist and the antagonist. But what's kind of funny is using the Karate Kid, kind of as a perfect example, where you have Barney Stinson who kind of can say, well, who is really the bad guy in Karate Kid, which I kind of think is what Cobra Kai plays on a little bit, and maybe that's kind of where that speech in this show kind of stemmed from. And it is kind of true, because when you think about it, what is good versus bad? What's good to you might be bad to me. What's bad to you might be good to me. And regardless of what it is, I mean, we can all kind of agree murder is bad. But there's that one dude out there that's like, hey, not really. And because we're watching him invade Ukraine right now. So you get what I'm saying here. So I think when it really comes down to is not good versus bad, but strong versus weak, kind of as I alluded to earlier there. And when it comes to politics, we're talking about strong policies versus weak policies. And I wanted everyone to keep that in their mind, because when it comes to what NATO is doing and Russia is doing, Ukraine, and everyone else in the world, it's strong policies versus weak policies. That's what makes the difference. Using a moral judgment isn't going to get anyone anywhere except where America is, and that's just arguing all the time. So getting back to what we were talking about here, really to understand what's going on out there, you have to really understand, what NATO is and where it came about. And I'm sure at this point everyone knows it's, the North American Treaty Organization. And it's just something that kind of came out of World War II to kind of keep the Soviet Union in check. And, if we look at actually this NATO Alliance map in the early 90s, what you can see here is a lot of these in the center of the map that are white. So this is right after the Soviet Union fell. So you have like Ukraine, Romania, most of these that are white. I don't think Sweden and Finland were, but they were part of the Warsaw Pact. So once the USSR went down, basically we got a bunch of free agents, if we're using a sporting reference here. But, given the circumstance, the NATO Alliance, America, they were kind of just trying to, stay back. And I think I might be a little bit wrong on this, but I believe there was kind of, Bush didn't want to spike the football when it came to, when the USSR fell. So I think they kind of just backed off and just wanted to let those countries, do their own thing and not expand NATO. Well, let's bring that map back up. So this is dated February of 92. So this is right when Bill Clinton goes into office. And so NATO has been around for about 40-something years at this point. And you can see, I think Turkey joins, in the latter part of it. They were one of the last countries to join. And, for the most part, they kept these Eastern powers in check. I mean, it's basically been the dominant force since the 1990s. And, a lot of people, were asking not for NATO expansion, but when Bill Clinton came in, NATO expansion kind of became a thing. But why would the United States do that? They promised the Soviet Union, we're not going to basically expand into your territory. Well, this is awkward because here's the United States basically saying, look, we get it. Things happen. Your house is falling apart. Your neighborhood's in shambles. But, we're not going to move in. We're not going to move our sphere of influence into your former Warsaw Pact, into your free agents, if you will. And then Clinton comes along and, that's the first thing he starts talking about is, expanding NATO into these former Warsaw Pact countries. And that's kind of where I want to talk about this, CIA Psyop going on, where everyone's trying to say that Russia is the bad guy. This is, NATO is good. USA is good. Well, are they? Because last I checked, we promised another country that we weren't going to, expand NATO whatsoever. And then a new administration comes in and basically starts expanding into former Soviet bloc countries. And why is this bad? Well, first of all, we're hypocrites. We sit there. I mean, I'm going to use a current events. For instance, here you have Joe Biden going around the last few weeks. He's a butcher. He's a butcher. He's a butcher. I mean, what else did he's a war criminal. War criminal. Really? Because I remember back in August, a guy delivering water bottles to in aid in Afghanistan was droned along with 10 of his kids by this same administration, calling, Putin a butcher. Really? I think you both are butchers. And I get, it's frustrating me because I don't want to say that the United States is the bad guy here, but they're really, really not making this easy for me or anyone else. And honestly, it gets to the point where you're just frustrated with what the United States is doing and why they're doing it. You can't slap someone across the face, to use a current events reference, and then, do the same thing to someone else and be like, well, it's different when I do it. And this can kind of be seen in the way NATO has expanded over the last 30 years. Boom. Okay. Look, all of that white. These are all mostly former Soviet bloc countries. This is something new. This has never happened before. Well, does anyone remember the Cuban Missile Crisis? Because Fidel Castro took over Cuba in the late 50s and started allying himself with the Soviet Union. And next thing you know, they're trying to move, nuclear arsenal pointing at the United States, the city 3.5 hours from where I'm at, with nuclear missiles pointed at it. And the United States did not take too kindly to that. And that's where this, the Cuban Missile Crisis came from, where you had, I can't really remember exactly what it was, but we came pretty close to nuclear war there, where I think there was just an embargo where they're blocking off Cuba. Russia said they're going to move their ships in there, and then at the last second, Khrushchev blinked and turned all of his ships around. And, why was that? Because the United States didn't want nuclear arsenal or any kind of nuclear arsenal, 90 miles away from their shores, let alone, being pointed at them. I mean, this makes sense, doesn't it? I'm with the United States on this one. So it's just so odd for them to go 30 years later and be like, let's expand NATO and start, and then during the Reagan administration, they're like, let's take missiles and point them at the Russians a few miles. I mean, I think right across the border in Turkey or something like that. So in the end, are we supposed to expect Russia to just accept a foreign policy that the United States had rejected 30 years before? I mean, this makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. And I know a lot of you want to sit there and say, oh, well, these are just, pro-Russia Putin talking points. And, I'm not going to say you're wrong. I mean, based on what I'm saying, I'm trying to really lay this out so these don't come across as like pro-Russia talking points by any stretch of the imaginations. I mean, there's actually a YouTube personality I follow. Her name's Carrie Wedler. She's a libertarian. Got nothing wrong with that. But dear God, her brand of libertarian is a tad bit toxic, and it definitely comes across as pro-Russia talking points. But, at the same time, I understand where she's coming from. It's just outside looking in, you're like, damn, why does this chick hate the USA so much? But really, she hates the government. But again, the messaging, it can really get lost in translation when you're just sitting there shitting on the United States constantly, not really being nuanced with your point, and it just comes across as, almost pro-Russia based on just anti-American. You can almost see how Russia can foment and turn us all against each other, especially with some of these people in the Libertarian Party. So, the situation isn't really nuanced, or it's very nuanced. It's not binary, So this isn't USA good, Russia bad, Russia is evil. I mean, there's so many moving parts going on to this that it's just not as simple as being a binary example of USA, NATO good, Russia bad. I mean, it's just that simple. And you got to remember, like the CIA, the FBI, these are the same intelligent apparatuses that were going around spreading Russia disinformation, spreading what is it, weapons of mass destruction propaganda in Iraq when none of this existed. These are the same people that basically spent the Trump administration leaking out any information that would damage him. And for what? You know what I mean? Like, you have to remember, the CIA, the whole reason they exist is to foment wars. You know what I mean? Like, if there's a reason that we have the FBI, because if we didn't have the FBI, the CIA would be working here domestically. The CIA technically isn't allowed to work domestically in the United States. It's only a branch of the intelligence services that works overseas. But I guarantee you, they still probably operate on some level. I mean, they basically operated here for 4 years during the Trump administration, leaking against him. And this, what you're seeing in the media and alike, is the CIA propaganda. Because where do you think the media gets all this information from? Do you think they're doing hard-nosed journalism? And all this information is being leaked to journalists because this is the narrative that they want. And, you know, as far as the journalists is concerned, you're probably thinking, well, why does the journalist want to, you know, propagate CIA propaganda, essentially? And it's not that they are pro-CIA. They're just all pro-war because the CIA gets what it wants with war. And if you're in the media, you might end up being a war correspondent going to Russia, Ukraine, or, you know, reporting, you know, on as a press on, you know, on the front lines. And this is good for your career. I mean, there's a few guys, actually a few articles that came out recently. I think it was an NBC News guy that said his career had changed when he went to go report in Iraq. So this is why the media loves war, because it's good for business all around. It's just so sadistic. And that's just the CIA for you. It's just a giant fucking war machine. And it just truly exists to just warp people's minds. And we're watching this in real time. I mean, we literally have people here in Florida visiting from the north who are wearing masks outside in 88-degree weather. I mean, that is literally a psyop. And it's just coming from, that's more like a CDC psyop, if you will. But you can see these psyops are taking place, the CIA, the CDC, just generally in the government. And, you know, speaking of which, let's talk about these NPCs on the left and right really quickly who are, you know, putting Ukraine flags in their social media bios. Like who is this helping? You know, like, what are you doing? Like, just, I don't understand the mindset there. Like, yes, you want to help. You want to be a good person. But you're hypocrites. You're hypocrites. I don't think you truly understand how ridiculous you look to people like me. You sit there and spit on the American flag. You want to kneel on the American flag. You want to kneel during the American flag anthem. Just do anything that is non-patriotic when it comes to Americanism. But you're ready to go to war for Ukraine? You're ready to put their flag in your bio? Are you sure about that? Do you even know what you're doing? I don't think you do. Because guess what? To tell me that I'm the white supremacist. Yeah. Out, you know, how this works is, you know, let's think about what's going on here when it comes to, you know, this war. I mean, it's basically like, I kind of like to think of it like a lunchroom brawl, kind of. And this brawl, you know, you have, you know, the American table, you know, and then their buddies, which are like the NATO allies. And then on the other side of the lunchroom, you have China, North Korea, you know, like the Asian table, so to speak. Yeah, in our high school, all the Mexicans like to hang out at the radiators. I never understood that one. So, but anyway, I'm sidetracking here and probably going to get canceled for that one. So yeah, you have, you know, the Warsaw, the Pact on the other side, which, again, that's doesn't exist. But, you know, to China, Russia, North Korea, Belarus, all these countries that are aligned together against NATO. And basically we have a giant brawl going on right now. Excuse me. We have a lunchroom fight going on between Ukraine and Russia. Oh, I wish I had the clip in Seinfeld. Ukraine is strong. And, you know, these two are fighting right now. And in the first few weeks of the war, there's, you know, and even till this day, Ukraine keeps asking for more weapons from the United States. You know, I think about halfway through this month, you know, there was talks of maybe moving MiG jets, you know, from the Ramstein Air Base into Poland and then get those into Ukraine. And this looked like it was going to happen, and then at the last second it didn't. And a lot of it was because people are looking at this as an escalation of war. And, you know, in this lunchroom allegory, if you will, this kind of makes me think like, the United States, everyone's kind of watching. A circle has formed around this brawl as these two are just hammering it out. Like everyone's like, oh, well, Russia's going to kick this guy's ass. This thing's going to be over in no time. We can go back to eating our muffins. And it ended up being a pretty good fight, so to speak. Russia's getting a few shots in there. Ukraine's just, kicking his legs out. All of a sudden, Russia can't. I mean, I'm not Joe Rogan. I'm not going to call this fight here. But while all this is going on, you have the United States that is, quietly like bringing a hammer, giving it to their buddies, and it gets to like the Polish people who are supposed to hand it off to the Ukraine so he can just beat the fuck out of the Russian with it. But as it's like changing hands, there's some people that are like, that Chinese over there are seeing us like handing this off, and the Russian guy over there sees it too. If we move this hammer into the fight, they might start nuking everyone. So that's kind of what was going on there. And right now, as of today, usually they're talking about this thing so much, I'm just kind of not really paying that close attention to it. But Russia is kind of struggling to take Ukraine in a way that they didn't expect. So this fight's actually definitely turning into a brawl, maybe a stalemate of a brawl, and the United States and NATO are almost seem like they're doing whatever they can to stay out of it. And a lot of that has to do with Russia having over 6,000 nukes. So that's kind of led me to think, well, if we have this NATO alliance, Russia is invading Ukraine, why aren't we really doing anything about it? It makes me wonder, like, Russia, what's the whole point of NATO existing? Why do we even use it? If we have an alliance with Eastern Europe, Western Europe, right? Eastern Europe, I don't know, whatever, that side of Europe. I feel like I should know that. What's the point? You know what I mean? Shouldn't we have just gone in there and helped? I know everyone does. I trust me. I understand that. That's an escalation tactic. And you have a country that has 6,000 nukes, but it's going in there and massacring people. Like, I think today, it's disgusting what's going on, especially the news that's been coming out in the last few weeks. So you just wonder what's the point of this? Why do we use NATO? And I'm going to tell you why. Because it's not it is, yes, about alliance and stability in the world, but there's something else kind of going on there that no one wants to talk about. And, one thing you kind of hear is, and this is kind of ties into why, Trump said that, he wants everyone to spend their fair share. It's funny how, here in this country, we want billionaires to, pay their fair share. But when it comes to other countries, we're basically being subsidized by our defense budget. They don't need to pay their fair share. It's probably just as simple as the fact that Trump said it. But this is one of the reasons why NATO exists, is because you have countries, Germany, France, all of these NATO countries. They know they're being protected by the United States government, because if another country comes into their country, we're going to defend them. So why would Germany, France, Turkey, why would they have to have big, defense budgets? Because, again, they're in a way being subsidized by the United States government. And then here's the other side of it that no one really understands. You think to yourself, well, why did they add countries in 92 and then in 2008 when Bill Clinton came in? Why are they talking about in 2008 with George Bush, and 92 when Bill Clinton came in, and then with Ukraine maybe talking about joining? What's going on here? Well, everyone knows that these countries that are part of NATO, they are buying weapons from us. Raytheon, Lockheed Martin. So basically, again, going back to the war machine, this supply, I don't know if anyone's noticed, but the United States is probably the biggest planet's arms dealer. And this is what that does. This ties into the fact that this NATO alliance really is it's about stability, but it's also about selling weapons to countries. You have more alliances, you have more weapons to sell. And there's nothing more capitalistic than that. So now the question is, what has NATO become? Like, what is it? I guess to Russia, to China. Again, I'm not trying to say that, NATO is bad and, feel sorry for these countries, but let's just kind of look at it from their perspective. I mean, if you ask me, NATO is basically, turned into that bad neighbor. I mean, look at what they're doing. They're expanding all the way on Russia's, eastern side, western side, to the point where there's this giant barn door open for an invasion into Russia. And you're probably thinking to yourself, oh, well, that will never happen. Why would the United States invade Russia? And it's not even about that. It's just about the sheer fact that you have this wide open flank that just leaves you to be attacked. And it's, again, I'm not someone that runs the government or is in the government, but if I had a bunch of my friends or a bunch of people that I didn't like living around me, yeah, I would be a little nervous too. And what makes, the United States a bad neighbor here is, let's say you have this neighborhood and, all of a sudden, this guy that you hate, this guy that's basically just started, that had been fucking with you for so long, they start telling you, hey, we're neighbors, we're friends, we don't want any problems. We aren't talking to your neighbors. We're not trying to put them in our sphere of influence. And then the next thing you know, you're like, why does that guy got a tank in his front yard? Every time you drive up into your home, you're wondering how many missiles are being stacked up in that person's chimney. I thought that Maud liked me. And this brings us to the part with the rising gas prices. This is kind of what I wanted to tie into this whole Ukraine debacle here is, after all these financial sanctions that the United States has put on Russia, the banning of importing Russian oil, gas has shot up almost 35%. And, what's funny is from the Russians' perspective is you have someone say, hey, we're not talking to your neighbors. We're not selling them weapons. And then after all of that, you find out your bad neighbor is telling all of the people around you that you're the reason gas is expensive now. I mean, that's not stable if you ask me. But, hey, Trump's not tweeting, right? But look at how gas has gone up. I mean, this says it all right here. The gas has been in a steady incline ever since Joe Biden's taken office. And what's so crazy is how we got here. And you got to think to yourself, well, how did we get here? Well, it actually starts with Jamal Khashoggi. And if anyone doesn't remember that, he was an American who traveled to, I believe he was born in Saudi Arabia. He was a journalist, but he was an American, traveled to Turkey to go to a consulate there and was basically dismembered by, I think he went to a Saudi Arabia consulate in Turkey. Turkey was spying on them because that's just what foreign nations do to each other, and was murdered by the Saudi Arabia government. It was all proven, and this became a big talking point in the middle of the primary season in 2020. So because of all this outrage, mostly because, again, nothing's binary when it comes to this shit. It's all nuanced and layered. Because when Trump started his administration, he went to Saudi Arabia. He was helping Saudi Arabia with this Yemeni war, which is just an abomination. And again, goes to my point to why the Americans really aren't as good as you think they are. Look it up. And this is the Democrat Party just trying to, use that to their advantage in running for office in an election. So they used Jamal Khashoggi as let's probably put that up, as a way for a talking point against Trump. And you're probably asking yourself, what the fuck does this have to do with gas prices? Well, I'm going to show you. First, let's listen to that Biden campaign video.
And I said it at the time, Khashoggi was in fact murdered and dismembered, and I believe in the order of the Crown Prince. And I would make it very clear, we were not going to, in fact, sell more weapons to them. We were going to, in fact, make them pay the price and make them, in fact, the pariah that they are. There's very little social redeeming.
Jesus Christ. I mean, that guy looks so much worse back then than he does now. But anyway, you can see, where this is going. So Biden calls, MBS a pariah on the campaign trail. And this basically starts, where we're at with gas prices, because, MBS, he gets mad. He doesn't want to talk to someone that's, talking shit to him on the world stage. But then Biden goes ahead and makes it worse by, canceling the Keystone Pipeline, He ended some of the Trump energy policies that made America more independent when it came to, God, I can't talk. For making oil and stuff like that. So we were actually producing a lot. I think about 800,000 barrels a day of oil between American energy independence. And when you add that with the Russian imports and what Saudi Arabia was pumping, there was a lot of supply in the country. Now, I believe if you see around the time of 2022, it starts to dip here. That was the 2020, excuse me. That was the pandemic. So what you had now is a lot of supply and no demand. So that was kind of why the price went down. But then as Biden comes in, pisses off Saudi Arabia, cancels the Keystone Pipeline, starts halting drilling on federal land in the United States, like basically just castrated our ability to have energy independence. And as you can see, the line just it starts going up, 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 and up. And that big giant jump you see there is when they banned the Russian oil. And this kind of forced Biden to pivot. So now he had to go back to Saudi Arabia. And, now this is where, reports were coming out that Joe Biden, called called MBS to talk to him about, pumping more oil. And then it was said that he wouldn't take Biden's phone call. That's true. It's not true. Either way, Biden was forced to pivot, hat in hand, and ask the Saudis to pump more oil. And they didn't, And I mean, if you think about it, in the beginning, I believe in that campaign video, you heard Joe Biden say, that he's not going to take MBS's call. So if you're MBS, you're thinking to yourself, Joe Biden won't take my call. Well, that's it. We're not pumping any more oil. Shut it down, Darren. Darren! And the Biden administration, their big pivot and attempt to spin this whole oil crisis into the Putin price hike is an example of the sleeveless analog magician that we have as politicians. And you're going to, I got a few clips we're going to play for you that are going to just basically show how just disgusting and just, it's almost like they think you're stupid, like that your attention span is too low to understand what's truly going on. And maybe they're right to that, because there's not everyone that follows politics on a day-to-day basis. But if you were at least paying attention to the gas prices, you'd known since this war that they had already been going up. And there's the audacity of the press secretary to sit there and try to spin this like, this is something that's completely out of their control. It's an abomination.
It's this week that your gas prices have gone up. I want to talk to you a little bit about why.
Yeah, bitch, they've been going
up.
A
lot of it has to do with Vladimir Putin.
It does not. I'm not going to even play any more of that because it's just insane, just the lying that goes on through the rest of that video. And again, that was an official White House video. These are the same people that claimed stability was coming back to the White House. These are the same people that said they were going to be the adults in the room. And speaking of adults and old people in the room, what did Nancy Pelosi have to say?
To the question, the larger issue about Putin's tax. That's really Putin's gas hike. That's his gas hike. So much of this increase in the gas tax, gas price started weeks leading up to what happened there.
Okay, so if this is not dumb enough about them blaming oil companies, the Putin price hike isn't dumb enough, they're also blaming oil companies for this hike in gas prices. Now, if you really knew what was going on, this is what's happening. So as I alluded to earlier, there was when the pandemic happened, there was a lot of supply and no demand. So a lot of these gas companies or oil companies, they lost money there. And I'm not trying to argue that they're right in what they're doing, but capitalism, right? So right now there's a lot of demand and gas is high, so they can kind of offset what they lost during the pandemic. It's their prerogative, you know what I mean? And it's not they're not the ones creating this, massive spike in gas prices, because the government's trying to say, well, they should pump more. It's like, I guess, yeah, but like you probably shouldn't have gotten rid of all those policies that kept the gas price down in the first place. So turning around and blaming the oil companies, it just makes no sense. Like, you wanted to be the adults in the room, right? You spent a year and a half running for office saying that we need to get this big baby out of office and put this big baby into office. And really, I get it. A lot of people, they're happy now that, Trump's not in office. But look at how crazy things are. Gas is high. We got a war going on in Ukraine. China's just doing whatever. The federal government, the FBI, the DOJ is investigating Hunter Biden, Joe Biden's son right now, for tax whatever. It's just insane. But you know what? Trump's not tweeting. The world's basically unstable as it has been in however many years, at least 20, but Trump's not tweeting, so everything's good, right? The American public isn't stupid. They're not. They understand what's going on here. And these obvious talking points, obfuscating the Democrats' leadership's responsibility for the rise of gas. I don't think they're that stupid, are they? No. They can't be. They can't be that dumb. There's no. It's not like the government would, go grab a bunch of TikTok people and tell them to make some TikTok videos with White House talking points, and then people would buy into it. Well, that's a little scary, isn't it? What is going on here? Like this obvious manipulation through the media of, saying like this is not our fault, this is something completely out of our control, is asinine. Like, this is something you'd expect the media to say about the Trump administration, but now the Biden administration is doing it, but the media is not going to hold them accountable. What is that? This is why CNN sucks. This is why MSNBC sucks. This is why Fox News is, the one reason they're leading everyone is because at least they're being somewhat upfront, but they're still spinning their own propaganda at the same time. And the fact that they're using the TikTok, this is just insane. What the fuck? How did this happen? And if that's not bad enough, let's get rid of this TikTok thing really quick. If that's not bad enough, you have your the transportation secretary. It's just that simple. How much more rich and disconnected can you be, sir? Give me a break. And if that's not bad enough, you have the energy secretary. People just clearly do not give a fuck about you and me. You and me are not represented in the government. You know what I mean? Like, everyone that's working in the government that's in an elected position is just some rich fuck who's never had to live paycheck to paycheck, at least in the last 20 to 30 years of their life. So what does this all remind me of? We have your energy secretary saying, hey, go buy a Tesla if you don't like gas prices. That was the transportation secretary, whatever the situation is. You have all these fucking elites who are just so disconnected, who aren't affected by inflation, rising gas prices, any of this. And all they're trying to do is sit there and tell you everything is fine. This is the Putin price hike. This has nothing to do with anything that we're doing. There is absolutely nothing to see here. Biden has been burning down the policies Trump had in place that at the very least kept things stable, like I said earlier. And now he's sitting in the room while everything burns around him, saying everything is fine. The United States government is gaslighting you domestically on fuel policies in the same way they are gaslighting you on this NATO-Russia Psyop. That's going to do it for us this week. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. Again, don't forget to like and follow us on Facebook. Check us out on YouTube. Hit the bell. Give us a subscribe. We're also on Rumble. Thanks again. We'll talk to you next week.